evening, everyone. I'm Ellen FUTTER, President of the American Museum of Natural History, and it is my very great pleasure to welcome you tonight for this discussion on one of the most important subjects of the 21st century, human disease. We are deeply honored to have with us tonight President Jimmy Carter, and very, very pleased to collaborate as well with the Carter Center on this program. As the Ebola crisis has made clear, we live in a global community where disease and suffering in one location affects everyone, everywhere. There are many factors contributing to the increase in the threat of emerging and re-emerging diseases and epidemics, including mutation, drug resistance, population growth, poverty, war, urbanization, increased travel, and the disruption of natural habitats. There are also, however, stories of great success and innovative approaches in the face of these challenges, including the work of the Carter Center. We are pleased to collaborate with the Carter Center in presenting tonight's program and on the current exhibition, Countdown to Zero, which highlights, as shown in the video, the Carter Center's dogged 30-year campaign to make guinea worm only the second disease, the other being smallpox, to be eradicated. The museum itself has a long history and a renewed focus on human health and disease, both in our research and in our public presentations. One of the museum's most highly attended exhibitions ever was its groundbreaking exhibition on tuberculosis in 1908, which was visited by more than 750,000 people. More recently, we have presented the Genomic Revolution, the first exhibition on that topic following the completion of the first sequence of the human genome, and Epidemic, the World of Infectious Disease. And coming up later this year, we will be presenting a major exhibition about the microbiome, the highly individual ecosystem of microorganisms inside each and every one of our bodies and its complex role in health and disease. And on the research side, our scientists are working in many areas related to human health, pursuing leading-edge microbial research in ecology and genomics of disease, what causes it in organisms, and massing a microbial collection that is a tool in that research. This approach, of course, is quite different from, though entirely compatible with, that of the Carter Center, for whom a specific area of focus is fighting disease, especially in resource-limited countries around the world, where they work on the ground to build partnerships and pursue innovative approaches, which you'll be hearing about in just a moment. The guiding spirit and driving force behind all of that work, of course, is President Jimmy Carter, and we are so honored to have his participation this evening. And so, without further ado, I am pleased to thank you once again for attending, and now to turn things over to our moderator, John HOCKENBERRY, who is a distinguished journalist who has worked in television, radio, and print for more than 30 years. He has worked at NPR, MSNBC, on ABC's Dateline, and since 2008, has been host of The Takeaway, a live national morning news program from Public Radio International and our own WNYC. He has won the Emmy Award 4 times, the Peabody Award 3 times, and is the author of both fiction and nonfiction books on the subject of health. And he has been involved in a number of projects, including narrating several Nova series on disease and medicine. Ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted to present John HOCKENBERRY.
Thank you, Ellen. It's great to be here. Welcome. Well, I've worked a lot of rooms here in New York, but this is the Upper West Side Manhattan Eradicate Parasite crowd. Whoa. We are going to be rocking it tonight. What a great house. Welcome to this fantastic institution. I should say, the American Museum of Natural History is a lot of things to New Yorkers. It's a huge institution that many of us have been going to since we were very, very young. Here, as adults, we like to think of the museum as Club Whale after hours. Ben Stiller is not in the house. Jimmy Carter is in the house. I'm thrilled to be here because in thinking about what Countdown to Zero means and eradication of disease actually means, I get to think very, very broadly. The panel that we're going to have here tonight involves, besides President Carter, who is an extraordinary activist whose fingerprint on the eradication of disease and the resolution of conflict around the world is an extraordinary legacy. For us even to be in its limelight tonight is an extraordinary honor, certainly for me and to all of us here. But we also have three doctors whose on the front lines notion of what it means to eradicate disease is something we're going to explore tonight. Let me just say that every minute a child dies of malaria. That's true. If you go to the Countdown to Zero exhibit, you'll learn that and many other important facts. But if most of us who aren't epidemiologists or infectious disease specialists or parasitologists, for most of us, we might conclude that, well, if, okay, one child per minute dies of malaria, that must mean, based on the amount of media coverage, 10,000 children die per minute of Ebola, right? No, nothing could be further from the truth. Part of our mission here tonight is to dispel the sense of mythology, the medieval fears that we have of disease, and also the mythical notions of triumph and success, some of which are achievable, some of which are not achievable. And it's only in empowering people to understand what disease is all about that we're going to be able to have a chance to do what Countdown to Zero suggests. If you think about what disease and humanity mean, signify, really disease and our relationship to disease is kind of a pivot point for all of civilization. Imagine, centuries ago, disease was something that was our lot. It was a judgment of the Creator. It was somehow a sense of our own misguided imperfections. And as time went on and as science developed, we began to think of, no, actually we can change our destiny. We can cure certain diseases. We can treat anything from a toothache to an infectious disease. And things like science took form, medicine took form, even our notion of free will and having our ability to master our own destiny, which is what philosophy is all about. All of these things pivot on our understanding of what disease is and our capacity to change it. So what the Carter Center is doing, what we're doing here, what the doctors you're going to meet in just a moment are doing, is part of a long, venerable, staggeringly important narrative in the history of humankind on this planet. And so our stumbles, missteps, and successes of today fall in that very, very long line of success and failure, but ultimately understanding of what it means to live. And that's what we're going to learn about. That's what Countdown to Zero is about. It's certainly about triumph and success and defeat of disease, but it's also about the success of learning what it means to live on the planet all together in the global community that is planet Earth. So we're going to have a lot of fun tonight. There's going to be a chance for you to ask questions of the president and of the panel. I think you have questions that are circulating there that will allow you, that will be given to me, and I'll be able to ask as many as possible later on in the hour. We also will have a lot of time to think about everything that's going on in the exhibit, but this is a point of departure. The exhibit is a place to learn a lot. This event tonight is really about thinking even beyond what this extraordinary exhibit has to offer. I want to introduce the panel now. Joining us first is Professor Jane M. Carlton. She's a professor at NYU and program director at the International Center of Excellence for Malaria in India. Please welcome her. Also with us, of course, tonight, the founder of the Carter Center with his wife, First Lady Rosalind Carter. His humanitarian efforts led to the Panama Canal Treaties, the Camp David Accords, the Treaty of Peace between Egypt and Israel, for which he shared the Nobel Peace Prize, the SALT II Treaty with the Soviet Union, and the formal establishment of U.S. diplomatic relations with the People's Republic of China. Please welcome, fresh from his appearance on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart today, the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter.
Thank you. Good speech.
Thank you. He may not want to follow that ovation, but I can tell you our next guest does it all the time. He directs all of the health programs of the Carter Center. Donald R. Hopkins is a senior consultant for the health programs at the Carter Center, where he led the Carter Center's efforts to eradicate guinea worm disease and river blindness worldwide. He also helped the CDC's effort to eradicate smallpox. Donald Hopkins. And tonight, our host, really, in many ways, and the man who we owe the greatest debt to for the design and composition of this exhibit, Countdown to Zero, which hopefully all of you will get a chance to see. He's curator of the Division of Invertebrate Zoology here at the American Museum of Natural History and president-elect of the American Society of Parasitologists. I've never introduced anyone from the American Society of Parasitologists. Please welcome Mark Siddall. So, President Carter, to begin, I covered your administration, the second term, and also was very much involved in covering the initial efforts of the Carter Center in conflict resolution. The mission there, world peace. You've got world peace, eradicating disease. Do they go together in some way? And let me hear from you how you think conflict resolution and eradication of disease go together in your experience.
Thank you very much, John. Well, first of all, the Carter Center was founded when I was retired from the White House inadvertently. It didn't have a second term, by the way.
Right,
and,
right, that's true. Yeah, I'm trying to be, warm and...
Well, anyway, we started the Carter Center, my wife and I, and we had one thought at that time, and that was to resolve conflicts, to have a miniature Camp David at the Carter Center where people that had a conflict or one impending could come to us and I would negotiate, as I did between Sadat and Begin, or either I could go to their countries. And we still do that. And then the next thing we had was the monitoring of elections. We just finished our 99th election in Tunisia a couple of weeks ago. And now we have found that the basic principle of the Carter Center has brought us to neglected tropical diseases, and that is that we try to fill vacuums in the world. We take action on a project only if no one else wants to do it. But if the United States government or the United Nations or the World Health Organization or the World Bank or Harvard University or the National Museum of History is doing something, we don't do it. We just try to fill places where nobody else wants to go. And so this has brought us to a neglected tropical disease agenda. In addition to malaria, we deal with 5 diseases that the World Health Organization classifies as neglected tropical diseases. Guinea worm is one of them, dracunculiasis. We also deal with trachoma and onchocerciasis, which is river blindness, and schistosomiasis and lymphatic filariasis, which is elephantiasis, when your legs and arms and sexual organs swell up to grotesque sizes. But tonight we're talking about guinea worm, and we started this in the 1980s because that was the decade of water. It was ordained by the United Nations. And my former drug czar, Dr. Peter Bourne, was the director of that program, and he came to the Carter Center and described some diseases that were horrible and afflicted hundreds of millions of people, but were derived from the drinking of impure water. And we adopted guinea worm as one of our projects back in 1986. And so we undertook this. The disease only takes place in isolated villages, mainly in arid areas, where people don't have a running stream or a well or anything else to get water from. It was in 3 countries in Asia and 17 countries across sub-Saharan Africa. 23,600 villages. We've been to all the villages now. And we had 3.5 million cases of guinea worm to begin with that we found, and we now have 126 cases left. And we hope that soon we'll...
Well, to hear you speak, I suspect, without being partisan, I'm not the only one in the world who's dreamed of a Carter second term, but it's your second campaign that I cover. That's neither here nor there. Mark, what is the definition of eradication for the 21st century? What are we talking about when we're talking about elimination of disease? And there are various categories of that. I wonder if you'd lay those out for us.
I would, but I also want to disabuse anyone of the notion that I was the only person involved in design in this exhibition. We had a great team in our exhibition design, graphic design group and interpretation group who are here in the audience tonight, and they really deserve a lot more credit than I did.
Of course.
I didn't get in the way. But the issue of elimination and control and eradication, they're actually very specific words that have very specific meanings. Control generally means that you're getting a disease, an infectious disease of humans, down below a definable baseline number, presumably one that's not going to overwhelm the healthcare system in a particular area. Elimination concerns a geographic region. We have eliminated, for example, malaria from Canada. We've eliminated malaria from the United States. We've eliminated polio from the Americas entirely. We have not eradicated polio from the world because it still exists in various pockets. There's somewhat less than 500 cases per year of polio, for example. We're at 126 cases left of guinea worm, which means it's on track for eradication, having been eliminated in various countries and various regions.
How many cases of guinea worm?
Mr. President?
126.
126.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a list of names you could fit on one page. That's tremendously.
Well, we know every person's name in the world that has guinea worm. We know what village they live in, we know why they got it, and we're making sure they don't spread it to other people.
All right, so the definition of that, of knowing that that trajectory exists, we're down to 126, that's on the way to eradication.
That's the point. And knowing, it's interesting, it's all of these elements, control, elimination, eradication, they're fundamentally, of course, about interceding in the infection cycle, but they're fundamentally about data, gathering massive amounts of data from people, empowering healthcare workers in various countries and various regions, not only to apply the tools of, say, vaccines or drugs or water filtration in the case of guinea worm eradication, elimination, and then eradication, but also empowering those people to gather the necessary information to know if these tools are having an effect and where the remaining cases are.
So John, I would also add in regard to eradication, elimination, and control is that unlike control, with elimination and eradication, as Mark has said, according to limited geographic area, that's elimination, worldwide, eradication. But the other distinction is that with elimination, you have interrupted transmission of whatever it is, and you can stop the interventions, the treatment or immunizing people. You just need to maintain surveillance as long as it's elimination to make sure you detect any cases that might be important and then act on those. Globally, with eradication, then you can stop interventions, vaccination, treatment, worldwide. So the distinction is that you've interrupted transmission to the extent that you can stop the interventions, and that's the power of eradication economically.
Jane, what is a candidate for eradication or elimination or control? And using malaria as an example, are there diseases that have characteristics that make them clear targets for the kinds of initiatives that you're involved in?
So that really depends. I mean, malaria is really a bit of an oddbod because there are multiple species that infect humans, and there are multiple different epidemiologies. So depending where in the world a patient is, that patient may have Plasmodium vivax, which has a dormant stage in the liver, which means those patients are actually very difficult to identify. Contrast that with in Africa, where Plasmodium falciparum is actually the very dominant parasite there. So malaria is a very different kettle of fish, I would say, perhaps, compared to what we're talking about tonight. And so that means that in certain countries, we may be able to eliminate and move on to eradication. And as Mark said, in certain parts of North America, in Mexico as well, they're also trying to do that. But in other parts of the world, I work in India a lot, it's actually going to be many years before we can even attempt a pre-elimination phase before we go for eradication.
It occurs to me that kettle fish might be an easier to remember nomenclature for these diseases. Describe again these two terms, the one that lives in the liver and then the other one that's maybe more
absolutely. So there are approximately 200 million cases of malaria each year worldwide, and about 500,000 deaths. Those deaths are primarily of children under the age of 5 in Africa, and that's caused by the very virulent parasite Plasmodium falciparum. It's usually the one...
Plasmodium
falciparum.
Falciparum.
I apologize.
Okay, that's good. No, that's fine. You got to know this stuff.
Don't apologize for taxonomy, please. Not here.
Says the evolutionary biologist. That's right.
John, excuse me. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, so Plasmodium vivax has this dormant stage, and that's found really outside of Africa. So you won't find people with Plasmodium vivax in Africa, and that doesn't kill people. So there's two really, different organisms that we need to fight there.
Mr. President.
John, there's one place on Earth where we analyze every human illness constantly to see which ones can be theoretically eliminated or eradicated. And it's International Task Force on Disease Eradication, located at the Carter Center. And Don Hopkins happens to be the chairman of that. And we also have people working with us from the Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, and a lot of other organizations. So Don and them analyze every human illness to see which ones can be eliminated from a particular region or eradicated from the whole world.
Don, is there a consensus among the nonprofits and the sort of humanitarian institutions in the world about how to do this? I mean, we hear all the time in the United States the war on cancer, or the armies that are going to defeat this and that sort of disease, metaphors which may or may not be useful in the actual implementation of something like elimination or eradication. What's the consensus on the part of these institutions that the President's just described?
I think it varies according to the disease and according to the institutions. And there are great debates going on about the relative efficacy of going after a single disease versus trying to improve health systems in general. And then you get arguments about individual diseases. But WHO, World Health Organization, representing the ministries of health, sort of has the final arbitrating power to whether or not the world agrees to target a disease for eradication or not. And right now, only polio and guinea worm disease are targeted for eradication. But I think one of the things I hope for when guinea worm eradication is completed is to advance further this argument that you don't have to have a vaccine to eradicate disease. You don't necessarily have to have a drug to treat a disease, but you do need to approach communities with respect, engage them in solving their own problems. I try to imagine what I would think about this argument about so-called vertical disease eradication programs, horizontal attempts to improve in general. And I would think that if I'm in a village like this, I would be grateful for what interventions, what can be done. Because the diseases are attacking, several diseases are attacking people at the same time. And of course, any rational person would want to help as much as we can. There are a lot of terrible diseases in the world. We don't know what to do about many of them. Some of them, we know things to do about them. Only a few of them, we know how to eradicate. So it shouldn't really be either or. It should be, let's help people improve their lives as much as we can. Don't denigrate a vertical disease program because it's only focusing on one disease. Just to take guinea worm as an example, by going after that one disease, we're giving people hope, we're improving their health, we're improving their agriculture, children can go to school, people in the ministries of health and people in the villages suddenly have this vision that by attacking this problem that has affected us for generations, we can do it. I experienced that in the smallpox program as a much younger man with hair. And there are a lot of people,
Smallpox had nothing to do with your baldness, though, right?
A lot of people today who are experiencing that in the guinea worm eradication program. Is that enough? No. people need other things as well, but some of the people who will have worked in this program will see the kinds of techniques we've used that Mark described a few minutes ago and apply them to other things. And I should also say as one final point, many of these lessons out of disease eradication programs need to be applied to control programs as well.
I want to come back to that question of strategy, because I think it's really, really important, and I think it relates to a lot of what you may be thinking about out there in the audience. But let's shift for just a second. And this is a question for the four of you, and, you know, jump up if you have an answer, and I'll go to the president, okay, no matter what. Basically, is this a moment that is fantastic for the kind of research that you do in the sense of communication and technology and sensing and our epidemiological technology that we have? Or is it the worst possible time because somebody gets on an airplane and they go and they breathe through a ventilation system and all of a sudden you've got Dallas vis-a-vis Ebola? What would you say? This is a great time for this kind of initiative, or a very, very problematic time for this kind of initiative?
I would say, being technologically challenged, that it's much better than the days when to call Ghana you had to go through an operator, when you didn't even have fax to Ghana, and now we can use email and other things I'm not familiar with. But the communication is much cheaper, much, much faster. So communication is better that way, to trade information, to inspire people and things. And I would say also that my experience has been that this generation of young people is, maybe because of the greater communication in the world, much more interested in things like that, things like this, and working with people in other countries, starting with very young children, including one experience I had very vividly of talking to a group of first graders.
Well, my daughter is live blogging this event tonight out here in the audience. God knows what she's saying. I hope I have a career when it's done, but yes, the young generation is very differently abled as far as communications and technology is concerned. How would you respond to that question? Is this a great time? Are there problems with the ability that we have to travel and communicate?
I would echo what Don said. It's a better time. I use one technology in particular in my research, and that's genomics. So that's looking at the DNA and the genomes of organisms. And recently we had a real revolution in that area, in that we can now decode the DNA of infectious diseases such as malaria parasites much faster, much quicker, much cheaper, and with much more data than we used to be able to before. And so we can do what we're calling a sort of real-time epidemiology, whereas before we would go to a village, collect samples. Perhaps some of those samples would have to travel for several days to a lab, and then perhaps they'd actually have to come back to the US or other more technology-advanced countries for the analysis, and it could be weeks or months down the line. Now with genomics technology, we can actually do sort of point-of-care epidemiology right at the village level, and I think that's what's really revolutionizing, especially what I do.
Mark?
I don't know how many people know that Dr. Hopkins was involved in the smallpox eradication campaign. You were in Sierra Leone, and I believe the whole time you were there, you couldn't even call back to the United States.
Correct.
You were sending things by, what was it? What were those things? Telegrams?
Telexes.
Telexes. Obviously, connectivity is a huge thing for...
What were those things? Telexes? You're the young guy here on the stage. Okay. Point taken.
I'm trying.
Yeah.
So obviously the connectivity of people is really important, and that's one of the things that we were trying to do with the exhibition. This is an opportune time right before guinea worm is eradicated to start celebrating that and getting people to pay attention. So they're paying attention when it is eradicated. The world was a very different place when smallpox was eradicated. People in the New World, people in the Americas, it had been eliminated from the Americas long before, back in the 1960s, about a decade and a half before it was finally eradicated, and people were not necessarily paying attention, and it wasn't really out there. Things are out there now, people are connected. We're hoping this exhibition helps people be connected. As it concerns technology, even down to diagnostics, there are new diagnostics tools being made from discarded cell phone cameras that you can just put drops of blood on and look to see if there's an infection of various sorts. These are things that are being used to empower people in local communities, the healthcare workers working right there on the ground, local, regional, national, and transnational, And I think that's what this story is about. It's about empowerment of people to take charge of their own healthcare futures.
Let's explore that a little bit, because go ahead, Mr. President.
Well, I would say that one of our worst, most difficult problems to overcome when we began with guinea worm in the middle 80s was the lack of communication, lack of understanding, because the people that have guinea worm live in the most isolated and poverty-stricken villages in the world. And they were totally illiterate. They didn't have any knowledge of, much less access to radio or television. So how do you teach them about a strange approach to a disease? Quite often they didn't speak either French or English. And sometimes we had to have 3 interpreters from their local language to a middle language, and then to French, and then to English. So the only way we could educate them about the disease was by drawing cartoons. And we would draw 2 cartoons, one with a woman getting water, and then one of the women filtered her water, and then this one over here filtered the water. She didn't have guinea worm. This woman had guinea worm coming out of her body. That was the only way we could teach them. And now you could probably not find a village in Africa that doesn't have at least 2 or 3 cell phones in the village. And some places, almost everybody there has a cell phone. So that itself makes it much more easy to transmit information and to receive information from those people.
John, another very important thing that's changed is that we have much better drugs for some problems now. And that's how we're able to attack river blindness and lymphatic filariasis, for example, that are in the exhibit. Schistosomiasis is not. I worked on schistosomiasis in the laboratory when I was a medical student. And at that date, in those times, generation ago, to treat people, you had to give them intramuscular or intravenous injections and hope you didn't kill them in the process. It was very toxic. And now you give people pills for schistosomiasis or for lymphatic filariasis for river blindness, and once or twice a year, almost no side effects. And so science has given us much more powerful tools.
And from the drug piece, which is sort of one part and probably more familiar to Americans, to this empowerment piece on the ground level. And if we're thinking of Ebola now, just for a moment, because in many ways it describes a situation that's an outlier compared to the work that you're doing and the millions that are involved in this work. But still, it's important in one sense, and that is, you know, we Americans are used to thinking of, all right, as long as I stay away from X, Y, and Z, and have access to this pill, I don't have to worry about this anymore. But on the ground in places like Sierra Leone and some of the other places that you've worked, having people with bed nets and having the ability to design the sort of therapeutic environment for their families with small, middle to low-tech solutions, and to monitor their health in a way that we might envy here in the United States, is part of the new revolution here. How are you seeing that in places around the world?
You know, it's interesting. In some respects, it may feel like a new revolution, but these were central concepts to the eradication of smallpox. It was people on the ground. For example, in the 1970s, following the civil conflict that had happened in Bangladesh, it was people on the ground becoming invested. It was people deciding that this is something they wanted to do at a local level, in addition to having the vaccine, of course. But it really required that. You had destruction of infrastructure, destruction of the intelligentsia in Bangladesh. It was really important to have people buy in and to connect with each other and share information. So in many respects, lessons, I think, from the smallpox eradication campaign have been transitive to the guinea worm eradication campaign and other disease eradication campaigns. What I've seen being with the Carter Center, for example, in South Sudan, is that the people who are living in these communities, like Mogos, where I was for some time, that they've deeply invested. They've invested in each other. There's a sense of shared responsibility. These pipe filters that were distributed by the Carter Center, they're involved just in filtering water. Very simple thing, very important. If you're there and you're not wearing your pipe filter, it's considered incredibly rude because you're endangering the community. You could be getting a guinea worm that's going to be distributed to somebody else. These are community-level things that are happening that weren't necessarily there. And they bode incredibly well for the future because even when guinea worm's gone, or even, let's say, when polio is gone, there's this group of people who now have knowledge about distribution of care, about monitoring care, about interoperability of communities. And I think it's fantastic what the Carter Center's been doing that way.
And we learned that in the AIDS crisis, where we moved from fear and loathing of populations to making choices that are high risk and low risk, and understanding how that works. Jane.
So I wanted to make a point, actually. We've been talking about empowerment of people, but there's also empowerment of the scientists in those countries where the diseases themselves are most prevalent. And I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle too. We don't want to all be sort of rock star scientists flying into endemic disease-ridden countries. We actually want to empower the scientists and the researchers in those countries to be able to undertake new and innovative research and develop the methods that will actually contain and control the very diseases which are in those countries.
How much of a moving target is this? How much do we have to think about control and elimination of any kind of disease in terms of the narrative that goes along with that, the development of resistance on the part of a parasite or a bacteria?
Right, so that's the issue of how the evolution of these different organisms really has us flummoxed in very many cases. So in the disease that I'm most familiar with, malaria, the malaria parasite has developed resistance to every single drug that mankind has made against that particular parasite. Even most recently, the most recent drug, artemisinin, which was rolled out about 5 years ago, now there is resistance spreading from Thailand and Cambodia. So it's a real problem. Part of that actually comes from the nature of the parasite. And the other parasites that we're talking about today have different biologies. The malaria parasite itself replicates incredibly fast. It can accrue a lot of mutations in its DNA and actually evolve new mechanisms to evade the new drugs that we come up with. So we have to be constantly on the lookout. We have to think of innovative new ways, perhaps to use drug combinations, because the probability of a parasite becoming resistant to 2 drugs at the same time is much less than to 1 drug. But we also have to, not misuse those drugs, a bit like antibiotic resistance and the sort of the knowledge that we have about that, especially in the United States these days, and potential association of antibiotic resistance with obesity, for example. So it really is, you're right, it's a moving target.
Is the fact that malaria is resistant to everything we've come up with, and I'm a typical journalist, so I'll anthropomorphize the malaria parasite and think of it as, huddled away in some room going, what are you going to come up with next, humans? Is that an argument for doing something else, knowing that they have the capacity to be resistant, or is it an argument for completely shifting our strategy in the way we approach malaria? And that's for any of you here as well. But go ahead, Jane.
Okay, so I would say for malaria in particular, that's a key example of where a vaccine could really help us. Perhaps not so much with guinea worm, but with a vaccination, that would really help to knock back and start to put a lot of countries in the pre-elimination phase. And in fact, we have 2 candidate vaccines, which are just getting through phase 3 trials. I think one of them is going to be produced by GlaxoSmithKline towards the end of next year. It reduces the incidence of malaria by up to about 50%. So it's not completely foolproof. But that is one case there where we really need to find a different set of armory to combat against the parasite.
I think we have to be careful that NGOs and scientists also, that we don't overpromise on this. And Don, you could probably talk more about that. I'm sorry to...
No.
I just didn't want that to end.
No, keep going.
No, I think it's very important not to overpromise, and just to note that again, some of the lessons from the guinea worm campaign, where through no fault of our own, we don't have a vaccine, we don't have a treatment. Where you have a vaccine and a treatment, those are key things and are powerful tools to use. That still does not release you from the need to engage the community and have them understand what's happening, how you're trying to help them. My favorite example in this regard is measles vaccine that was licensed when I was in medical school a generation ago, from which people are still suffering. A lot of people have benefited from that, but not as many as could have, with better engagement of the community. I wanted to go back also to the point of what's in it for New York City, for people living in New York City and other places. My college chemistry professor used to say that God sprinkles talent at random throughout humanity. and I'm mindful of some of the extraordinary talents that have come out of some of these communities that we're talking about. And I'm personally haunted at the talent that we lose unknowingly, because many of these children are dying, or adults are being crippled, and things like that. And to sort of illustrate that, I ask people to imagine what South Africa would have been like if Nelson Mandela had died of measles when he was a kid. And there are lots of other talents out there, not necessarily at that level. One of the people who helped guide those Mars, the rovers that are on Mars, was born in a community called Nioro du Sahel in Mali, near the Mauritanian border. The person who designed the exterior of the Chevy Volt was born in northern Nigeria. There are talents that mankind needs. And the final point I would make is that for all we know, the person who could have already found a common cure to many or all cancers and things like that has been lost. Appeared on this earth and was lost because of they died early, or were crippled, or were lost some other way.
Mr. President.
John, I think we have to remember that even when the measles, malaria becomes immune, there are other aspects of treatment. For instance, I think one of the most significant scientific developments recently in history has been just the development of an insecticide-treated bed net. And we helped the people of Ethiopia, for instance, put in 2 bed nets in every home in Ethiopia that had malaria mosquitoes. 20 million bed nets. And these bed nets kill the mosquitoes when they land on the net. So it's a very good approach to controlling or reducing dramatically the incidence of malaria, which has happened already in Ethiopia. We're doing the same thing now in Nigeria as well. Another thing about rubber blindness, for instance, when the Merck company, they still sell a dog medicine. If you have a puppy dog, every month you give him a right guard, a heart guard. And they found out that heart guard, the veterinary medicine, would control rubber blindness. So they came to the Carter Center 27 years ago and said, we'll give you the medicine if you need it. So this year, we will take that medicine that's called Mectizan by Merck Company. We'll be treating this year 24 million people in the world, so they will never go blind, just with this free medicine that Merck Company gives us. This is 5 million people more than live in New York State. That's a lot of people, but they'll never go blind because we get free medicine from Merck Company from a former veterinary medicine. So these are the kind of things that evolve. When you don't have a vaccine that works, you still have to look for alternatives.
Makes you wonder how the folks at Merck figured out that the dog wormer actually works on humans.
There was a research scientist from Turkey in the laboratory that made this discovery.
There you go.
So
exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, back to what Don just said.
I'm imagining that when you're talking about fighting a worm or fighting a parasite or a scourge that has a name everybody knows, that people can get very passionate about getting involved in a humanitarian initiative. But when you start talking about improving access to sinks and clean water and medical infrastructure and clinics and closets of clinics that are clean, people's eyes begin to glaze over. As a matter of strategy in humanitarian efforts around the world, how hard is it to make the pitch for the kind of infrastructure upgrades that are clearly so important in the Ebola crisis, where doctors every day on my show would tell me it's not a problem in the United States, it's a problem in Sierra Leone. If you want to affect Ebola, improve the situation in Sierra Leone. Is it harder to raise money? Is it harder to raise money for better sinks and improving medical infrastructure?
It's expensive, and it's not sexy in the way focusing on individual disease. But again, I think one of the things that can be applied is to, I like to say, our task in public health is to marshal data, some of the data that Mark was talking about earlier, to make the right people uncomfortable. As long as the decision makers don't know about that, but once you can begin letting them see that there are these problems, number one. Number two, that there are solutions to the problems. And number three, that the solutions work in the field. And then quantitate that so they can see where they are now, where they ought to be a period from now, and then be able to see benchmarks along the way. That's one way to unleash the natural human desire to improve the human condition. And if you can take it a little further and get one country or one area of a country competing against other areas of the same country or against other countries, that also can help. But the main difficulty, I would say, is the failure to articulate these problems in a way that the right people can understand them, and also be shown that they're amenable to solution with the right approach.
That's why this exhibit is so important here at the museum.
So if I'm coming to Countdown to Zero, I may be thinking, Mark, that, oh, does this mean anything that I can be expected to encounter in my life here as an American? Does Countdown to Zero apply to all disease, or just a very narrow set of diseases? Is it an approach to all kinds of health care?
You know, if you'll permit me a parasitological joke,
Yes. Who wants a parasitological joke? Once in your life.
Once in my life in a room of 900. The importance of guinea worm is to demonstrate that what happened with smallpox was not a fluke.
Oh, that's bad.
But really, it's...
Yes.
Not many punchlines with the word fluke in the...
I've been waiting all year for that. No, but really, I mean that in the sense that, you know, there are a lot of people who could argue, well, you know, we managed to do it with smallpox, we didn't do it with malaria, we haven't done it with measles, maybe we should stop. The importance of the guinea worm campaign, granted, right now, I mean, back in 1986, when the Carter Center got involved, 3.5 million people across Africa and into Asia were afflicted with this terrible parasite. This is the only parasite of humans. It's not the only one that causes pain. It's the only one that absolutely must cause pain in order for the life cycle to complete. So that's what gets people to go into the water with that burning blister to soothe it with water. That allows the female to dump her larvae and complete the cycle. And
Oh, hey, did you hear that? Everyone groaning. That's just so evil.
go see the exhibition.
Oh, my God.
But honestly, there hasn't been a second success. Having the second success gives you a degree of freedom. It says, yeah, we do know how to do this. We do know the principles. The tools can be different in different cases. If we can do it twice, that means we can do it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And it does apply then very generally to disease, and it really fundamentally comes down to will.
Do we have the institutions to project that kind of will, the extraordinary success in guinea worm? Do you think it's replicatable, President Carter?
Well, I think so. We've now proven, for instance, in this hemisphere that we can totally get rid of river blindness. We've already done it in 4 countries. We've only got it in about 20,000 people that still live in between Venezuela and Brazil. Just a small tribe is the only one that have river blindness in this hemisphere. And we're now demonstrating in Uganda and also in Sudan that we can replicate this in Africa by giving more than 1 dose per year. And this eliminates not only the microfilaria, the microscopic worms that cause blindness, but also eliminates the macroscopic, the adult worms that breed and make the microscopic worms. So this has been proven, and I think soon Don, with his International Task Force on Disease Eradication, might decide that river blindness not only can be eliminated in a particular country, but maybe eradicated from the entire world. When he does, if the World Health Organization adopts it, then that would be another major effort to eradicate.
Anyone from the WHO here in the audience? You're on notice. Don, when you look at the headlines and open the newspaper and see, and I know you're a newspaper guy because you only stopped at email there, so do you look at places in the world like Syria and go, there are medical complications, consequences to exactly what's going on in a place like Syria that's now had a prolonged civil war for more than 3 years?
Yeah, there are lots of things, and and lots of things besides some of these diseases we've been talking about. Of course, I come at from the angle of the various diseases, polio, smallpox before then, and now guinea worm, where these kinds of conflicts are very big complicating factors. But even there, another thing that we'll learn from guinea worm once it's done. President Carter negotiated, for example, a 6-month-long ceasefire when there was this 20-year-long civil war going on in South Sudan, that even then you can get over that. The smallpox program succeeded despite civil wars in what was then Pakistan, East and West Pakistan, and in Nigeria, as well as in Sudan. And so there are difficulties, and right now we're concerned about insecurity in South Sudan and in Mali, especially, and we don't want people killed in the process of helping other people get rid of disease, but we have to find ways to work around them. But I come at it from that point of view, but then when I also see and read about the suffering just caused by the weapons and things, something that I'm not in the business of trying to, I certainly feel great empathy.
President Carter, when you think about this, the difference between a 6-month ceasefire or a 6-hour ceasefire, it's not just to allow the leaders to go and become friends or play a game of pool together. It really is about this list of, okay, we've got to get the nurses in there, we've got to get the doctors in there, we've got to change this in the infrastructure. Tell me how that thought process works when you're thinking about, we've got to get 6 months here. If we get another month, it's going to mean that much more in terms of the health of individuals on the ground.
Well, we had analyzed or quantified the number of guinea worm cases all over the world, and we found that South Sudan had a lot of them, and we couldn't get in there to treat the people or even to analyze village and village. So I went over there and spent a good many weeks negotiating with the leader of South Sudan, military forces, John Garang, and President Bashir, who's still there, in northern Sudan.
Who's a wanted war criminal.
That's right, in Khartoum. And both of them wanted to get rid of guinea worm, but they couldn't do it because the war was going on, and they knew we couldn't get in. So the North, who had tanks and trucks and so forth, they wanted the dry season is when to fight, because then they could travel all over South Sudan. The South Sudanese wanted the wet season because they could use the rivers and so forth. And so I couldn't get them to agree on a time. And finally, in 1995, they did agree to have a ceasefire. And if you go there now and say, how about the ceasefire in 1995, and they'll say, oh, the guinea worm ceasefire. Everybody knows it was just for guinea worms. So we have 0 cases in Sudan, and we have just a very few cases in South Sudan because of that ceasefire.
And that's an extraordinary sort of statement of the intermingling of public policy, diplomacy, and public health in a way that we don't often hear about in the media. I know you said people don't have access to television in some of these isolated villages. Maybe that's a good thing, because we certainly don't cover that kind of consequence of a ceasefire. That's really impressive.
Don was talking about local people making a contribution. The Tuaregs who traveled into desert areas in the Sudan, in the Sahara Desert, they didn't stay in one place and they traveled from one water hole to another. They heard about guinea worm, so they developed a process to tie a little filter cloth around the end of a reed, and they would put keep the reed around their neck on a camel or a horse, and when they got ready to drink water, they would suck it through the reed, and the filter would take out the guinea worm eggs. And so when we couldn't get into South Sudan to deal with that problem because the war was going on, we had a company in Norway
donated.
Donate the whole. They donated 9 million pipe filters then, and eventually 13 million. And so we sent the pipe filters in when we couldn't get in. And John Garang, who was the leader of South Sudan, he wore one around his neck all the way through. And so when we finally got in there, during the ceasefire, we found that we had much fewer guinea worm cases than we thought we would earlier. So that little pipe filter was invented by the Tuaregs. And what's the name of the company that did that for us?
The first one was now it's Vestergaard.
Yeah, Vestergaard delivers a lot of credit. They donated these just for the eradication of guinea worm. Vestergaard deserves a lot of credit as well.
Now we're streaming this event. And that's great, and you should absolutely applaud, but there's not some Tuareg inventor of the filter out there in the Sahara who's going to go, I still haven't gotten my check from the Norwegians.
There you go. We have one in the exhibition.
See, it's very simple.
Yes.
And you wear this around your neck, and the local people make these beads. This is the one I gave to John Stewart tonight so he wouldn't get guinea worm. And so you just put this in the water and suck the water through. You don't have guinea worm.
Yeah, Colbert's gone.
You might have other things.
We got to hold on to John Stewart there, yeah.
You might have other things,
exactly,
but you don't have guinea worm.
It's interesting where you see innovation. That we even have one in the exhibition, if you look closely enough, that it's from South Sudan. That's actually made from an old bullet casing.
We should also mention that in the early days, when very few people knew about guinea worm, and even fewer cared about guinea worm, DuPont Corporation donated 2 million square yards of nylon filter material to the Carter Center for use in the program. And before that time, we had been purchasing nylon filter material, a different variety of it, for about $6 or $7 per square yard.
Wow.
I've got all the props.
Oh, good. Fantastic. So how do people think about malaria? Do they think that there are countermeasures that they can take to take the kinds of steps that we're talking about here with guinea worm, or are there populations that just say, oh, malaria, there's nothing to be done about it?
No, not at all. I mean, everybody knows about malaria. I would say it's along with TB and HIV, it's one of the top 3 diseases. It's a disease that everybody knows about, and they want innovative solutions. The Carter Foundation has done fantastic things. I think we all agree with guinea worm. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are also fantastic in this area, and they provide seed grants for scientists and for others to develop innovative methods, for example, to stop mosquitoes from biting, producing a microwave that will zap mosquitoes anywhere near them. Things like that, and that's really key, really getting the interest of those sorts of funders to provide ways that us scientists can develop these new technologies. I think that's a real key component.
I want to spend a minute or two talking about TB since you raised the issue. How is tuberculosis, in some ways, the next mountain to climb, or a mountain that we are climbing now that really represents a lot of the same challenges that you've all encountered here? Doctor?
A huge challenge always has been, and has been made worse by the HIV epidemic, which has reduced people's immunity and made the tuberculosis problem even worse in some instances. Another instance where you have, in this case, a microbe that has become resistant to some of the drugs that have been developed against it. I would also mention, in regard to the malaria bed nets, that here we have another instance where the human element comes in, where it turns out bed nets are effective in preventing the same mosquitoes in Africa that transmit malaria also transmit lymphatic filariasis. And some of the people, Dr. Frank Richards is here, some of his people working with Nigeria, the same mosquito. It turns out that many people, and especially young men who are fairly blasé about malaria, were appalled, and you really got their attention when they realized that those bed nets could protect them from the grotesque genitals that resulted from lymphatic filariasis. Then they were ready to use bed nets.
Sort of the reverse Viagra argument in a way. We won't talk about that too much, but that's really fascinating because culturally, you know, this goes very, very deep in our sense of ourselves and what we value in life, and it's really interesting to think about. Is TB a parasite issue, Mark? And generally speaking, because I'm fascinated by this, do parasitologists think of bacterial infections as a parasite issue, viruses as a parasite issue?
We kind of have a hands-off relationship with bacteria and viruses. We let the bacteriologists and the virologists, I mean, we talk to each other. Some of our
You have better jokes, clearly.
Yeah, well, I'll be here all week. You know, TB is an interesting problem in part because diagnosability is not irrelevant to the ability to track and control a disease. And TB has this issue where you have lots of people out there who are asymptomatic. They don't manifest until perhaps much later in life when they're immunosuppressed. In fact, TB is immunosuppressive itself. They don't manifest disease, and they're carrying this around, and they can spread it to other people. This is really, really problematic for disease control, never mind elimination and eradication. It doesn't mean that we don't want to do it. It doesn't mean we can't do it. It just presents a different series of challenges.
How great is this, folks? Are you having a good time? I mean, what an interesting discussion. I think it bears directly on all of our lives, and it's been absolutely fascinating. I want to remind people that you can get tickets to the Countdown to Zero exhibition right here tonight, and of course, you're welcome to come back anytime to the museum to see it. And I've got some questions that I want to share with the panel here. President Carter, how is brain drain having an impact on community health workers who work with controlling and eliminating diseases in some of the places that you're familiar with?
Well, one of the worst things that we've addressed is the depletion of whatever registered nurses and doctors exist in those countries. They get trained in their own medical schools, and they can get a lot more money if they come to the United States and practice their profession. My mother was a registered nurse, and when we got through with the wars in Liberia, they have about 4 or 5 million people who live there. They had terrible post-traumatic stress syndrome and other results of the wars, and only one psychiatrist in the whole country. So my wife is in charge of mental health kind of at the Carter Center. She has trained 144 psychiatric nurses who now deal with the problems there. So that's a symbol of the brain.
There's probably 200 psychiatric nurses within a half block of here where we are.
Probably is, that's true. And even the Gates Foundation and others will employ a registered nurse from, say, Ghana or Liberia or Sierra Leone and get them to move to the United States. And we're trying to stop that through the United Nations effort.
That's great. Here's a great astute question. What role does education of the public play into the potential eradication of disease, and how can the media play into this? Dr. Hopkins?
Extremely important. The challenge is, as I said earlier, to educate the right people, including the general public. One of the ways we did that in the smallpox program, and we're doing that in the guinea worm eradication program, is to offer a cash reward for reporting a case of smallpox before of guinea worm disease. Now, the cash reward now for guinea worm is equivalent of about $100 US in each of the 4 countries that still have guinea worm disease. One of the roles of the media is to help publicize that reward. Another important role of the media is to let leaderships, the people who make decisions, know where their country stands, particularly if they're lagging, vis-a-vis other countries, or the reverse also, if they're well ahead, to keep people energized about the progress that's being made. I'm just a big believer that human nature pushes people to not want to be behind a peer, country, county, or whatever, and keep up and be ahead of them and shine in that respect, and that's a very powerful tool. I saw our ability in the smallpox eradication program with only a 2-week incubation period for people to look back every 2 weeks and see whether they were effective or not in immunizing 2 weeks ago. That was a very powerful tool and just brought out all kinds of energy, and we've tried to emulate that to a degree in the guinea worm eradication program. But it's a general principle. I like to say what I call the Disneyland rule. People will stand in long lines at Disneyland provided 2 things are true. Nobody's cutting in the line, and they can see that the line is moving. So part of the challenge also is to break the problems down into bite-sized pieces so people can see benchmarks that are being made or not. And one of the big things now with communications, for all how primitive they were when we started, is that people know what's going on in other countries and in other places. And once people are aware that somebody else is not suffering from this thing that's real, somebody else is progressing against this faster than they are, that creates pressure also on the right people to make
competition is healthy and great in this case.
Yeah, John, sometimes we have allies that we don't even anticipate. For instance, the Lions International organization, they have more than 45,000 Lions clubs in the world. They're dedicated to treatment of eye diseases. So when they found out that we were working on trachoma and river blindness, the Lions clubs came forward and said, we'll help you all over the world. So they've given the Carter Center a lot of $1 million to do away with eye diseases. And every time we go into Ethiopia, wherever they have a Lions club, they join with our volunteers and help us to eradicate the diseases that deal with eyesight.
So the community outreach is as important and valuable as the money that they provide.
That's right, and we know that Rotary Club has also helped with say, polio, but Lions and other, service clubs really are eager to work, day and night when we go into a country to do with these diseases.
This discussion leads directly to the next question, which is for you, Jane. What are the steps you recommend that help empower scientists in affected countries to go after their country's worst diseases?
So it comes down to education. In particular, I think the National Institutes of Health here in the US have a couple of institutes, the Fogarty International Center, which provide funds for international collaborations between US-based scientists and those in developing countries. And that enables developing country scientists to come over to well-equipped labs in the US to learn new techniques, new technologies, and be able to take those back. It's a transfer of technology back to those areas. I am the program director of an International Center of Excellence for Malaria Research based in India, and this is actually one of 10 throughout the malarious world, and we form a network across all the different malarious regions, and we are swapping scientists and moving from site to site, learning these new innovative technologies, and then taking them back to their own countries and using them there. So it's really, education is really the key.
And it's easier than ever for people to know the score in other communities where the same problems exist. Well, last question is a great question to end on, and because we're so thrilled to have him here and so grateful for the investment of the Carter Center in this exhibit and in pushing this mission forward. How far, President Carter, do you imagine disease eradication going? Is a future world largely without significant disease a feasible vision?
I think Don Hopkins would agree that the answer is no. A disease like Ebola, for instance, cannot be eradicated because it has a host in animals, and so you can't deal with it like we do with guinea worm, which is going to be eradicated. Polio will be eradicated. Smallpox is already there. I think river blindness will be eradicated. I believe measles will. There's a list of things that can be eradicated. But I think a lot of diseases are going to still be there unless the world just cleans up itself and gets rid of all the flies and gets rid of all the opportunities for people to drink bad water and to live in filthy conditions. Because those kind of diseases, I think, but I'm not qualified to answer that question nearly as well as Don Hopkins, so I'd like to ask him to correct what I've just said.
Absolutely.
Nothing to correct, Mr. President. You couldn't see me. I was shaking my head no. But humankind will always be faced with diseases. But I think the big challenge, again, I'm an eradication person, but I think, and there will be other diseases that will be eradicated, but only a few of them. Most diseases will not be able to be eradicated. But as I said earlier, the lessons can be applied to help a lot more people by way of controlling diseases and improving health infrastructure in the countries. As I think Jane mentioned earlier, and Ebola has just been the latest flagrant example of how important it is that, what goes on in China, in Chad, in South America, in Chile, it's relevant here, not always. When I was at CDC, we used to bring up to our annual appropriations meeting every year a list of the viruses that had been discovered recently from somewhere, usually in the tropics. And it was already always a very impressive list. There are lots of things out there, but this is one world, and it's getting smaller and smaller by way of communications and interchange. And so it is directly in the interests of people in New York City and Omaha and everywhere else. What's going on in the back or beyond of those villages.
Dr. Hopkins, thank you so much. I want to thank the rest of the members of the panel, but before we go, I can't resist asking you this question, President Carter. We live in an era where we think of presidents as powerful but not able to accomplish much in the course of their term, either because of political gridlock or institutional inertia, whatever it is that's going on in the American government right now. To see you sitting here at the age that you are right now, to have accomplished the extraordinary things that you have accomplished that we've been talking about this evening, what's your sense of one's ability to do something in the most powerful job in the world and doing something in the way that you've accomplished it at the Carter Center? Thoughts?
I would say the most crucial element would be to get a Don Hopkins to tell you what to do.
Is there a doctor in the house?
No.
I want to give you a chance to sum up if there's any thoughts.
I would correct Mr. President and say also an Ernesto Ruiz to also work on this.
Thank you, John.
Well, this has been a terrific event. I want to thank President Carter and the panel for being so generous with their time, and I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. And good luck, and thanks so much.
You did a great job. Thank you very much.